Well, hello everyone. This is Travis Campbell with notes on. My partner is not with us today because he is traveling, and we were not able to work out a time to do a show for you. This evening is a debate, and I would like to talk a little bit about the Waltz Vance debate that is upcoming. It'll be the third in this election cycle, but this is a weird election cycle, as everyone knows, because the first debate that Trump was involved in with Joe Biden occurred before the nominations were even formally given. And then, of course, Biden drops out of the race, and now we have Harris versus Trump. The first debate between them, by most accounts, was a victory for Harris, although questions about debate tampering, ABC giving questions uh, to the Harris campaign beforehand, that sort of thing has been thrown out, although there really isn't any specific evidence for that other than just the accusation itself. That said, a lot of people thought that the moderators were clearly one sided in the debate, wrongly fact checking Trump as he gave his answers, but in no way fact checking Kamala Harris. Probably the most blatant example of this was when Harris accused Trump of supporting Nazis, saying that there are good people on both sides, when that quotation is clearly taken out of context. Trump in no way endorsed um, Nazis on any occasion in his career, especially um, those years ago during those protests in Charlottesville. So I just don't think that there's any um, balance in the way those debates were moderated, or at least the first debate between Trump and Harris. That said, Trump probably knew most of the questions that were going to be thrown at him, and he knows what he's against. And so there were so many lost opportunities on his part. The 3-on-1 um, dynamics notwithstanding, he could have, at the very beginning, pointed out that Kamala Harris did not answer the question that was given to her when it was asked whether the country is better off than it was 4 years ago. He could have gone ahead and won the debate right there, and for some reason, he didn't do it. Trump was also accused of calling Congress people um, before an impending bill to secure the border was put to Congress. And he was accused of actually tampering with the vote, trying to talk Republicans into voting against the bill. And in doing so, uh, keeping things bad so that people would be inclined to vote for him. It's a strange accusation because even if it is true, that wouldn't mean that it would have been all that effective. Trump, as we know, tried to get people to stave off the election in the closing days of the 2020 election, and he wasn't able to get people to do it. He couldn't get Mike Pence to postpone the counting of the votes in Congress. He couldn't get various governors to comply with him. He couldn't get judges to. So if he had called a Republican and had a discussion with them, which ended with him trying to talk them out of voting in favor of the bill, that representative in no way, shape, or form had to follow his orders. It's also a strange accusation because I'm not sure what Kamala Harris's proof is of it. If that accusation is true, how would it have been leaked? Are we to believe that a Republican congressperson would go to work the next day and confess to a fellow Republican that they were arm twisted by Trump to vote against the bill? That could potentially end their career. Um, are we to believe that a Democrat was sitting at dinner with one of these Republicans and heard them talking about it, or they confessed to this Democrat about it? That too would be a very strange um, set of events that would get the word out that these Republican congresspeople were for hire. No, I think that the Republican congresspeople voted their conscience on that bill, and there are multiple reasons why a bill like that might be shot down by Republicans. It may have on the surface the shall we say, the goal of securing the border, but there may be so much involved with it, so much attached to the bill, that at the end of the day, the bill wouldn't be worth voting for. This is a very common trick that politicians play on each other, and we have to be wary of it, whether we're looking at a Democrat or a Republican. When a politician points out that so and so did not vote for a bill, we have to remember that some of these bills are 1,500, 2,000 pages long. And those bills always contain more in them than just the bill itself. Once the sponsors release the bill, they go to committees. And in order for a congressperson to vote for it, sometimes they say, well, unless you put these appropriations for my community so that I can get votes in the next election cycle, I'm not going to vote in its favor. And round it goes until the bill becomes almost the exact opposite of what it was intended for. Now, years ago, presidents fought for a line item veto, but in the late 90s, the Supreme Court declared that that sort of thing is unconstitutional. Plus, one of the very few speeches that I ever heard Robert Byrd give that I agree with did point out that if the president gets a line item veto, it would pretty much give him the power of the purse and overthrow the balance of power between Congress and the president. As tentative as it is now, that would be worse. So I think that we just need to be very wary about the fact that there are politicians out there that are voting for common sense bills. The pork involved in some of these bills keeps them from voting in favor of what would otherwise be a good law. So, how are we to assess this accusation on the part of Kamala Harris against Trump? I don't believe it, but the problem is that Trump himself didn't defend himself when he had the opportunity to do so. He could have categorically denied it. He could have said it's a strange accusation. What is the evidence for this accusation? And also, why why think that he would even have the influence to be able to influence a congressperson to vote against a bill that would actually do a lot of good for America? The most important thing, and Trump does say this in the debate, although it gets lost in a lot of the rhetoric, Kamala Harris has had 4 years as the border czar to secure the border, but she and Joe Biden have not done that. And this has become a major, major issue in the closing days of this election cycle. One of the things that I would like Mr. Waltz to explain to us is why the Biden administration hasn't done more to close the border. This is actually an issue that all Americans are facing as more and more illegal immigrants come into this country and more crimes are committed. It is naive in the extreme to think that this crime wave that we're experiencing is not part of increased immigration. The crime statistics, I think, are that the ABC was trying to spout in the last election are inconclusive. If I were Vance, I would be on the ready to show that, first of all, crime is increasing, and second of all, crime is increasing partly due to the increased illegal immigrants coming into this country. This is just not good for us. And I think everybody with common sense knows that. I think that the other thing that Tim Waltz needs to answer, and I would really like to know this, is why his own family doesn't endorse him. I have a cousin who makes the following statement, and I totally resonate with it. He said to me on many years ago, he said, I know personally roughly 10,000 people. There are about 10,000 people on this planet who know who I am. And I think that that's probably the same for me. Most of us are probably known by several thousand people, maybe even as many as 10. And my cousin said, every single person, every single one of those persons, they know that I'm an idiot. I don't want to increase that number to 10 million or 350 million in this case. If I were, however, to run for political office, the first group of people that I would go to would be my own family. I would ask them, do you think that I have what it takes to be a politician? And if most of them said no, or most of them said, I would vote for you, I wouldn't run. I wouldn't bother. The next thing I would do is I would go to my neighborhood and I would ask questions to them. What do you think about me running? And if I couldn't get my neighborhood to vote for me, I wouldn't run. Then I would go to my county. And you see the point. I would vet all those spheres of influence in my own life before I even think about, about putting my name in the hat for political office. Tim Walz can't get the endorsement of his own family. So the question is, if your own family cannot vote for you, why should I? I think that some of the other accusations that are thrown about him, about some of the bills that he has sponsored, especially concerning transgenderism, need to be answered. Parents rightly have great concerns about having autonomy over their children in their formative years. Parents should be allowed to say no to certain surgeries that are going to be imposed on their children. Parents should be allowed to say no to radical therapies which try to convince children that they are something that they are not. And I think that if Tim Walz has really supported or sponsored bills and voted into law bills that undermine the authority of parents over their children or the autonomy that parents have with respect to the way they raise their children, then I think that Tim Walz is not fit to be um, a mayor of a town, let alone the vice president of the United States. And if Kamala Harris is endorsing that sort of thing, well, then I don't think that she has a right to be president of the United States. The pushback on what I'm saying, from some people at least, will be that parents don't have don't have the right to have full authority over what children do with their bodies. And that's true. There are qualifications which come with the parental authority. But those qualifications aren't the principle. The principle is that the parent has the right to raise their children in the way they see fit. Parents have the right to raise their children in accordance with their own values. As a teacher, I introduce my students to all sorts of ideas because they're high school students. However, if I were teaching, say, middle school students, most of the ideas that I introduce my students to, I wouldn't introduce to at all. I don't think it's right for me as a Christian, for example, to challenge the faith of anybody in my classroom. I wouldn't say anything negative about Islam or Judaism or Buddhism or what have you to a middle schooler. However, as a high schooler, I give arguments against Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and yes, even my own faith. I have all my students question everything in the classroom because I think that's my job as a teacher of high school students, to get them to rethink everything they believe. And they're doing that in the context of a home where they can go home to their parents and have conversations about these ideas. They're doing that in context of a school where the parents can actually come to me and talk to me about the ideas I'm giving to the students. All of these things to me are just common sense. My students are just 4 years away from becoming adults, and they need to begin to think about these issues on a little bit more mature manner than they have in the past. We should be very careful about what kinds of ideas we introduce to our students. And we should not cause students to wholly deny common sense notions unless there are actual proofs suggesting that those common sense notions are false. Example, the common sense notion that the sun goes around the earth is empirically verifiable if you step outside your home and just watch the sun go across the sky. And yet we know it is just a scientific fact that that is not the case, that it's actually the earth going around the sun. And it's the rotation on the Earth's axis that creates the illusion of the sun going around the Earth. But until that fact was proven, the common sense notion should have prevailed. So, what is the principle? The principle is we follow common sense until we have absolute proof, or at least strong evidence to the contrary. And this should be true of education across the board, even up into the university level. Very understandable common sense ideas should not be laughed at or denied unless, of course, we have proof otherwise. Again, there are qualifications here. If you're sitting in a philosophy class, some of the windows can be open and crazy ideas can be let in to judge and vet and think about and ponder. But if you're sitting in a science class, I don't think that the science teacher should tolerate things like, well, the earth is flat or the sun goes around the earth. These are proven and provable facts that there are people that deny, but they shouldn't deny them. So that is my stance on these issues regarding culture. And the question is, does Tim Walz, does Kamala Harris support these ideas? Quickly, the Republican Party is becoming the party of common sense. And that is not a bad label for the Republican Party to have. And for certain elitists to sit back and judge those notions, that is becoming less and less tolerable among people. Even Bill Maher, if he and I sat down and had a conversation 10 years ago, we would probably disagree on almost everything. But I'm living in a world where Bill Maher and I, people like me, we're willing to put our arms down and defend common sense because what is coming out of the left is crazy. What should Vance be on the lookout for? What kind of questions should we raise to JD Vance? One of the questions that needs to be asked is, why is Donald Trump so often his worst defender? Why is it, for example, when Kamala Harris threw the accusation that he had vetted Congresspeople to vote against a bill that would further secure the border for his own political gain, why wasn't Trump there, standing there, denying that, and even having a visceral reaction to that? Why didn't he deny that if it's not true? Now, his critics are obviously going to say, well, the reason he didn't deny it is because deep down he knows it's true. But, um, if he is the liar that he's often being accused of being, then I guess anything he does is not going to be good enough. If he doesn't answer the question the way Kamala proposed it, he's going to be accused of knowing that he did that, and so therefore he didn't answer the question. And if he did answer the question, say, I most certainly did not do that, he's going to be accused of lying. So I'm not really sure how Trump can get around that. But that's the one accusation that's been thrown at him that I don't think there's been a full answer to. January 6th, I understand the debate both ways on that. That is going to be something that is going to hang around Trump's neck. It was one of the worst mistakes any politician could make. What Trump should have done back in January is he should have conceded the election when it was clear that all of his legal avenues to stave off the vote happened. He should have left the office in dignity by going to the inaugural address of Biden. And then sometime later, a year later, he should have rolled up his sleeves and begun his campaign for a new term as president. That would have been the right thing to do. People would have respected him for it, and he would be no worse off and probably a lot better off than he is right now had he just done that. But he didn't. And so the American people are going to have to make a hard choice. I'm going ahead and endorsing Trump for whatever my endorsement is worth, because I think that the political left is so radically anti common sense and so radically anti traditional values. And they lie more, I think, than Trump has ever lied. If you take all the lies that Trump has been accused of and you multiply them by 2 at least, I don't think it would begin to compare with the kinds of lies that are given to us by the political left. And since the political left just is that which is controlling the Democratic Party, they just can't be trusted. And I was tipped in this direction mainly through the endorsement of Trump by JFK Jr. When someone who is a lifelong Democrat and has the legacy he has forsakes his own party to embrace Trump, knowing that with all his flaws notwithstanding, he's still the best hope we have for a Democratic/Republican form of government, then I don't think there's any question that we need to go ahead and get behind Trump and get this over with. I know that I have friends that are going to be voting for Harris, and They are not bad people for doing so. I understand why they're doing so, but I want to urge them, look at what's at stake. The man says a lot of things that are crazy, but if you look at what he does, there's a lot of common sense behind them. Harris flip-flops, she lies, and she has not made a single accomplishment since becoming vice president. And if you look at her record as an attorney general, you should be embarrassed by it. She herself has bragged about uh, going after pot smokers, for example, despite the fact that she was a pot smoker herself. And yet she put that on her resume. I mean, this is a person that does not have any principles whatsoever and is willing to change them at the drop of a hat. Donald Trump, at least, has tried to fulfill all of his campaign promises. And his campaign promises, again, are drenched in common sense. Everybody knows that you should secure your border. That means that you need to build a wall. That means that you need to stop flying illegal immigrants in. That means you need to begin a process of deporting illegal immigrants from their homes. I'm so pro-immigrant that it's not even funny. I mean, I want immigrants to come into this country, but I want them to do so legally. This is common sense, and this is not racist. It is not bigoted. It is not xenophobic. It is just sheer, understandable. Again, the word is common sense. And I would expect this of any country. Any country should be allowed to protect itself. I am a nationalist. I am not a globalist. I do not believe in a one world government. I do not believe in international laws that would, in any way, shape, or form, break the sovereignty of any nation. I think a nation has the intrinsic right to defend itself and pass the laws that are in continuity with the principles and the values of its own people. And because I believe that Trump is the better choice than Kamala Harris, who belongs to a globalist party who consciously or unconsciously wants to undermine the values of this country and therefore the country itself. And therefore, for all the rhetoric that we heard at the DNC of a renewed patriotism in the Democratic Party, I think that that was mostly fluff. I think that those who are in power in that party, and even some that are in the Republican Party, like Dick Cheney, who endorsed Kamala Harris, he did it because he is a globalist. Remember, he is the one that started a war that we ended up losing and cost billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of American lives. Well, I don't know about hundreds of thousands. I can't remember the death toll in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it was in the tens of thousands. And we're getting ready to involve ourselves in the same kinds of things if Kamala Harris becomes president. I do believe that Trump will end the war in in the Ukraine, and I believe that he will be instrumental in creating peace in the Middle East. But that's my opinion. The most important thing that I think I have to say at the end of this little tirade of mine, and I want to thank you for listening to me. I think that as Christians, we need to constantly remind ourselves that our faith is not in princes. Our faith is in a sovereign God who controls history. I'm going to be delivering a paper at a conference really soon, and the question that I'm raising is whether Matthew misinterpreted the seventh chapter of Isaiah. If you're not familiar with that text, Isaiah is prophesying in that chapter of the virgin birth of our Lord. In Isaiah 7:14, it says, "Behold, the virgin is with child and bearing a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel." The question that I'm raising is whether Matthew has misinterpreted that verse, and therefore have Christians misinterpreted that verse for the past 2,000 years. It is often said that the word translated virgin there, ha-alma, the young woman, literally, doesn't mean virgin. I'm actually arguing in the paper that it does. It is also argued that the context, the literary context of that chapter, is not really talking about anything messianic, but is only talking about a war going on in Isaiah's day. I'm going to argue that the context actually demands that we interpret it as a messianic prophecy. But for today, I'd like to just point out something that I derived from this text that is really universally applicable to all believers. And that is when this war was breaking out, the king of Israel in the north and the king of Aram further north created an alliance, and they came down and invaded Judah and sacked Jerusalem. Uh, well, they laid siege to Jerusalem. And so, as King Ahaz, a very wicked king in Judah's history, went out to investigate the water supply for the city, that's where Isaiah met him. And Isaiah actually told him not to fear these smoking firebrands, as he calls them. The invasion that they have concocted will not succeed. And then he goes on to say to him, if you want to hear or see a sign, I'll give it to you. Trust in God. And he goes on to say, if you don't trust in God, if you don't have faith, and there's two ways to translate this. One translation would say, if you don't have faith, that's because you're untrustworthy. And the other translation is, if you don't have faith, you will not stand. So this is a message that we can actually embrace for our day going into this political arena. There's violence in the streets and there's violence internationally, and we don't know where to turn sometimes. Um, I want to urge all of us as Christians to strongly consider, first of all, who to vote for, but also to know that no matter who wins this election, God is still in control. When you wake up the day after the election and you realize who is going to be the next president, half the country is going to be extremely upset about that. I know that I may very well wake up and realize that it's going to be President Kamala Harris. My plan from that point forward is to pray for her. She will be my president. My plan from that day forward is to wake up every day serving God the best I can and honoring her office. I will be probably the loyal opposition. I will critique her whenever she does something wrong. And just as I would if Donald Trump is president. If Donald Trump wins the presidency, that doesn't mean that that it does mean that I will get what I want because I'm going to vote for him. But that doesn't mean that I know that he's going to constantly do things that I want him to do as a president. He's not always going to be just. He's not always going to make the right decision. He's not always going to be wise in his decisions. And he's going to display that ego that we've all come to know and regret on so many occasions. And on those occasions, I will critique him. I will criticize him in this venue. But regardless of who wins the presidency, I have faith that we're going to get through this. And by this, I mean the border crisis, the economy that is devastating so many families right now, and the international crises that are facing us. I'm absolutely confident of that because when I read a chapter like Isaiah 7 and I look at how much they were facing and what they were against, and the fact that God pulled them through it, He did the impossible. It got so bad that at one point, Ahaz's son, Hezekiah, found himself surrounded by 180,000 Assyrian soldiers, and God took care of business for them. Now, He may not perform a miracle for us, but I do believe that in His good providence, He will see us through it. So, what are you supposed to do as a Christian in the midst of all of this? Besides pray for your leaders, besides not engaging in your revolutionary activities where you threaten the president or do anything like that, you are to honor your government. You are to use legal means to get your values either displayed or made legal in our courts of law, in our judicial system, in our congresses, and so forth. And you are to pray for your leaders and obey them. And you're to get up every single day and go to work, pay your taxes, and do the kinds of things that Christians are supposed to do with respect to their government. As my dear friend Jeremiah Pitts often says, Christians are the most boring revolutionaries on the planet because that's what we do. We obey the authorities that are placed over us, and we only disobey those authorities when they tell us to break or deny or contradict in any way, shape, or form the inerrant and infallible Word of God. I hope this helps. I hope this gives you some perspective. I'd like to see your comments below. And hopefully next week, my dear friend Ross Hoagland and I will be able to deliver something for you that's a little bit more exciting. So God bless and take care.